Okay? So,
Of course.
so it's great to see everybody again. It's been a while. I think I've seen some of you over the course of the last couple months in London or in Boston, but most of you haven't seen some since October. So I'm really looking forward to a good discussion today. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of kick things off by providing some context, right? So we have as our special guest today members of a not yet publicly announced venture called the Social Venture Exchange, based here in Oakland, right? It's the U.S. arm of a social venture exchange that was piloted in, of all places, Ontario, Canada, okay? And we'll talk about how, because it's pretty unlikely to see financial businesses exported from Canada into the U.S., and we're going to get into some of that when we talk to the founders, okay? So what we're going to do today is we're going to spend some time talking about, and how many of you right now, just raise your hands, are working on a social venture that you would like to see funded? Raise them high. Okay, cool. So one of the taglines of the Social Venture Exchange is to connect meaning with money. So I suspect all of you are too young to recognize this quote. If you're committed to singing meaningful songs, you have to be committed to leading a meaningful life that backs it up. And the person who quoted this said, "My aunt took me to see Pete Seeger when I was 13 years old. Most music seemed silly after that concert. It was the coming together of social awareness, of courage, and of songwriting. And it changed everything for me forever." Anybody have any idea who we're talking about? Well, there's Mr. Seeger, and we're talking about Joan Baez. Okay, so Joan Baez was one of the great protest movement singers of the Woodstock era and of the 60s. And she did leave a life of meaning, both as a songwriter and in her daily life. Okay, and she marched with King, and she staged many protests and did sit-ins. And we look to many people who have lived their lives with meaning, right? So I introduced many of you for the first time to Yvon Chouinard, who talks about living the examined life, right? And he's been a remarkably inspirational leader, specifically in the environmental world. Anybody that can get Walmart to change their environmental practices is pretty goddamn impressive, as far as I can tell, okay? And we obviously, as an international school, we look abroad for inspiration. There's so many examples I can share with you, but one of those examples is Bunker Roy, who started Barefoot College. But we don't always have to look far away for inspiration. Many of you joined me in this very classroom 2 weeks ago and had an opportunity to meet a remarkable young woman named Hannah Chung, who created a business that essentially provides personal robots in the form of teddy bears to kids with type 1 chronic diabetes. Okay? And I think many of you, it was visible, it was palpable how much Hannah touched you. Right? She's an extraordinary young woman, 24-year-old South Korean woman who is changing the world, and who was named by Forbes magazine as one of 10 young American leaders in tech at 24 years old. Okay, I'm struck as I travel around the world and I go visit whole campuses in places like London, and even though I'm teaching EMBAs, and I'm teaching an EMBA style format course, which is a 10-hour day, 4 consecutive day course, and I have 25 students come up to me and say, "Professor Mike, would you be willing to spend a couple extra hours with us talking about disruption in the social world?" Okay, these are EMBAs, these are not MSCs, okay? And they come and they present some really extraordinary ideas to me after a 40-hour, 4-day forced march, okay? And then in this very classroom, and this is where I want to introduce some of you to our social investors here in the room. Mike Jarrell is not here, right? Hey, J-Lo, but Marjan is. And so Mike is the gentleman who I mentioned who was going to go off to General Assembly and help them start their social business. And he's starting Social Coffee. Okay, we have some folks in the room, Orlando and Irena, who were working on a project which is crowd parents. Okay, and we'll talk more about what they were focused on. Okay? We had a number of our students in the room working on allowing people in the Philippines to bring their indigenous crafts to the world. And that project is called MUCA. We have Natalie Macus in the back of the room. And I know that you've rebranded the company. What do you now call the company today?
Vida.
Vida. Okay? And this is about maternal health in Nicaragua. We have some of the creative types around iCreate. I don't see Julie, I don't see some of the other principals, but iCreate was an after-school program to allow young kids to be able to sort of participate in the arts. Okay, and then we have the Latin American Charlie's Angels, several of which are here right now. And what they were looking to do is they were looking to bring some of the best practices in entrepreneurship to nonprofits and NGOs in Latin America to give them the opportunity to be far more effective. Not to be outdone, we had a group of very studly males who decided that they were going to work on the same idea in Brazil. Okay? And we have Robert Wang over there, the most passionate Chinese man I have ever met in my entire life. I think he's got some Italian blood in there somewhere. Who, along with his colleague Ramon Quinones, who really is Latin from Puerto Rico, both working on bringing a much more dignified approach to educating young people and not putting immense pressure on their shoulders and having their entire life hang in the balance on one standardized test. And what that means and what that represents to people outside of the US is almost hard to understand. Then we had this incredible mashup between some Europeans and some Latin Americans, including Christian, working on a venture that makes it a whole lot easier to allow refuse and waste to be transported out of city cores by providing financial incentives to allow that to happen. And forgive me for those of you whose photos I have not put up, but in the interest of time, I'll just share one other example. This is the Hull Prize team from San Francisco. This is Niketa Malhotra, who was the teaching assistant for this very class in September, October, who wound up winning the Hull Prize in San Francisco and getting to present to Muhammad Yunus and Bill Clinton and Pramel Shah and others. Okay, and this was a business called Hull Savings, which is to address the issue of food security in urban slums. So our students are inspired not only by people like Bunker Roy and like Yvonne Chenard, but by their peers and the people that have come before them. And so I think they buy into this quote because they are living this life. Many of them came here because they didn't like what they saw in the world and they wanted to change things. So very much like Robert Kennedy, there are those who look at things the way they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. That's exactly who these students are. Right? So many of them are working on a dream. And that dream is a venture, but a social impact venture. And I think one of the things I try to convey to this class is that it doesn't matter if you're from China, if you're from Italy, if you're from Syria, if you're from Belgium, if you are from Switzerland, if you are from Italy, if you are from India, if you are from Mexico, if you are from Brazil, if you are from Nicaragua or Iran, and I can continue. Silicon Valley is a place, is not just a place, it is a mindset. And that is what we have tried to infuse these students with. Now, one of the problems we have, and the great philosopher Dilbert is always the final word on most things, is that there's a tremendous amount of pessimism and skepticism. And if you do not believe you will succeed, you will not. Okay? And unfortunately, one of the challenges for most social entrepreneurs is lack of access to capital, pure and simple. The beauty is, whether it be our good friend Mr. Omidar, who has completely revolutionized the world of philanthropy, or Mr. Yunus, who has obviously brought microfinance to the world, and it has been put into practice in an extraordinary way by Kiva, a place where many of our students have interned, or whether, and this is a fellow at the Acumen Fund, Social Venture Capital Fund, and invest patient capital in enterprises that sustainably save or serve the world. Okay? And the Acumen Fund, of course, has had its success. And there's this new phenomena called crowdfunding, which is an extraordinary addition to the arsenal that these students have available to them. And it's become a phenomenon that is almost unprecedented in its impact in just the last 3 years, with billions of dollars distributed. But unfortunately, there continues to be a gap, okay? And so the students need to mind the gap so that they don't find themselves getting hurt as they try to start their ventures. And what students probably don't appreciate because of the myth of the venture capitalist is that the venture capitalist is the master of the universe and they are the only place to go get money. And nothing can be further from the truth. And it's becoming less relevant and less true each and every day. And so in the world of private for-profit ventures, we have a remarkable phenomenon called AngelList. And what AngelList has essentially done is they have globalized what was largely a local business. The old cliche was, if I can't drive and have a cup of coffee with my entrepreneur, I have no interest in investing in them. And AngelList shattered that once and for all. And AngelList has completely, not just globalized the business of angel capital, but it has also brought infinite transparency. So there is no longer any question as to who your investment syndicate is. And you can actually begin to see the connections and the cross-syndication, and I can go on and on around the transparency that AngelList has brought to the world of angel investing. But what we need, of course, is to bring AngelList to social impact investing, and that is where we start off. So with that, I want to work with Anthony to bring in the founder of SVX from, of all places, although he's in New York today, right?
He's in New York today.
So why don't you come on up, Anthony, and we will we'll Skype in our first presenter, and we'll go from there. Okay? Thank you. Skype. Cool. Excellent. Yeah, I'm gonna do that as soon as we get him on. So I'm gonna let you sign in with your name. So while Anthony is signing in, I want to introduce our guests. Okay, so Anthony Jewett is gentleman I wound up meeting back in Washington D.C. at a graduation event for a very interesting organization called Thinking Beyond Borders. And Thinking Beyond Borders is about bringing gap year programs to people that have just graduated from university, right? And believe it or not, that's still a fairly alien concept in the United States, right? Most parents want to see their kids go directly on to college, right? Just like you can imagine, we've invested all this money in your high school education. Why would you possibly want to take a year off, right? What a crazy idea that is. There's been a lot of research that proves that students that have gone through gap year programs are far more successful both in university and they're far more successful in their careers, right? Because they've had a chance to get off the treadmill and really be thoughtful and mindful about what they want to do. So Anthony has a very interesting background. He's been involved in a number of different pursuits in the social realm. He's worked at bringing a lot of at-risk youth, including Native Americans and African Americans and other minorities, into educational programs. He's been involved in other social impact venture programs. He has a Doctor of Education from Harvard, but he is investing all of his time and passion into the world of social impact. So we're very lucky to have him. And he is the newly named CEO of the Social Venture Exchange here in the United States. So he's taking the idea that was born in Ontario and bringing it here. They have not yet actually publicly announced the Social Venture Exchange. So we have the benefit of being the very first group that they are actually meeting with and sharing this with. And I thought the timing would be ideal. So let's welcome Anthony. If you would be so kind as to give a proper introduction to your colleagues.
Absolutely. These are some phenomenal people who I'm really privileged to work with and excited to introduce to you guys. I just want to say on behalf of all of us how much of a pleasure it is to be here with you this evening. All of us being so interested in social enterprise. When I saw this program, I was like, why didn't they have that when I was looking at graduate? So the first person that I'll introduce you to is Ms. Deb Parsons. And Deb is my co-founder here, and she has a tremendously interesting background. I know that she has this is like, she's on the spot, like, what do you know about that?
Yeah, do it.
I know that Deb has an MBA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she received an award for her integrity.
Wow.
Came with a cash prize.
And what is more important than dealing with investors than having integrity, right? Master Spence?
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Doing well. So actually, I'm in a room with probably like 50 people right now.
Oh.
I can see them. You just can't see them. I'll turn the computer around in just a little while so that you can actually see the room.
Right on.
Cool. So we're actually in the middle of introductions. I was actually trying to introduce Deb. I think I'm going to let Deb introduce Deb, and then John introduce John, and then you introduce yourself. How about that?
Sounds great.
Cool. So,
Oh, sure.
MBA, integrity.
Right. So hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. So I had a part 1 and part 2 career that was cut in the middle with my MBA because I had this aha moment that I wanted to use my business skills for good. And working, oh, you want me to come up there?
Please, yeah, I'm gonna have you guys all come up now, okay?
All right.
Take a seat up here. Cool. Hey, please, go for it.
All right. So probably like many of you.
Are you still there?
There we go. Everybody's waving. All right. How's that, Adam?
That's great.
Awesome.
Wait, where are you?
Okay, so my name is John, and so I had my part 1 career down the street. Actually, my first job was across the street in Conan Building. Paid $24,000 a year, living in San Francisco. So it was not for me. But I was trying to figure out how I was going to use my business skills for good, and I was working at a nonprofit in Boston at the time, WGBH, which is the largest PBS, NPR media station in the country. So makers of This Old House and Frontline and Zoom. And it was a nightmare. It was just a terrible experience for me because I didn't have the skill set that I thought I needed from getting an MBA to really affect the change I wanted. So went to school and focused on sustainability, focused on venture capital as a way to change the world. And I was what's known as a Carolina Venture Fellow. And I worked at a community development venture capital fund called SJF Ventures. Its original name was Sustainable Jobs Fund in its first incarnation. But everybody thought that they were a foundation and just a do-gooder, so they changed their name. And now they're on Fund 3 at $75 million, and they're one of the top tier VCs in the country, focused on clean tech and energy resources. So the branding and evolution of investing in the community has, certainly changed since 2006. That was my first taste of using investing for good. I moved on and did a startup venture capital fund called Good Capital. And Good Capital is based here in San Francisco. And one of the things, besides raising a venture capital fund that included both for-profits and nonprofits, which trying to go out and sell this kind of fund was not an easy endeavor. We also created SoCap. So if any of you have ever been to the Social Capital Markets Conference, SoCap, that came out of the work at Good Capital. And from there, I ran a large national angel network called Investor Circle. So if any of you are domestically based in impact deals, they would be an angel network for you. And then I've been basically a freelancer. So I've worked in maternal health. I've worked in funding large energy projects in Southeast Asia. I've worked at helping bring mind-body medicine to Gaza. I've been doing a variety of different things just to challenge myself over the years, but really what it comes back to is I see the real impact that we can have is by changing who the investors are in the room. And most recently, I've been working at an equity crowdfunding platform, not AngelList, but it's AngelList meets Pinterest, and it's called Portfolio, and it's really focused at women as the investors, because if you change who is the investors, you're going to change what gets invested. And the reason why I'm excited and I'm co-founding this organization with Anthony is because I think that we can bring that to a much higher level and having an impact in our communities by creating and empowering the folks that live in the communities to be investors. So I'm really happy to be here and happy to be a resource for you.
Thank you.
I gave like
Not
another
fun.
intro.
Was that too loud?
That was awesome. I was like, wow, I remember her. That's great.
That's very
I gave-
helpful, honestly. It's great. I think the more connections you can make, the better it's going to be for everybody.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I gave a little context for Dad, so again, a little context for John.
No, what were you thinking of saying?
I just, similarly, earlier today, I was sharing their bios with Mike in advance of being able to come. And one of the things that I sat up in my chair, I was like, wow, these people are pretty awesome. And like, I had never read John's bio before. And John is pretty awesome. I didn't know that you were a faculty member at a couple of different management schools, including INSEAD and Berkeley.
Correct?
He is an absolute expert in securities compliance and regulation, and so I'll let you tell him tell you a little bit more about his background. But I've been very fortunate to get to know he and his partner Jenny Casson, and we're really excited to be working with them to bring the SPX to the United States.
Right, so we're partnering with SPX, and my history that leads toward this is I left Chicago as an attorney, hoping never to practice law again in my life because I was so disillusioned with the practice of law. I came out to San Francisco to trade on the floor of the stock exchange. And it was a great lesson and learned a lot, but I was bored out of my skull. I couldn't stand it. This is all a pattern already. Couldn't stand it. I became their general counsel eventually. Spent 12 years with the Pacific Stock Exchange, learned a tremendous amount about the markets, about securities, law, regulation of securities, and set off for a couple of startups. One was going to revolutionize the way all securities were traded. Unfortunately, my founder kept telling that to the head of the New York Stock Exchange. And it's a great lesson for everybody. If you're going to revolutionize something, don't tell the people that you're going to disrupt.
Uber is one exception to them.
Yeah.
They're pretty out there with it.
Yeah. If you've got a stake, if you don't need the cooperation of the SEC, go for it. But if you need the cooperation of someone who's highly political, you better be careful. So that was our lesson. We raised $350 million and we folded because they knew how to shut us down. Came back here with another startup. But what I really wanted to do was disrupt the practice of law after my early experiences and my experiences dealing with law firms as general counsel for, by that time it was like 15, 16 years. So I started a firm in Oakland that I felt truly could disrupt the practice of law, while at the same time trying to bring back something that I felt we were losing rapidly, which was our connection to the way capital was raised. And the reason I thought it was quickly vanishing and diminishing is that it was moving into the hands of very large players. It was controlled by very large players, and we had lost already something that I experienced firsthand on the floor of the stock exchange and as their lawyer, which was listing of local companies and helping nurture local companies and allowing for anyone to invest in those local companies so that they could grow into whatever size they wanted to. By the time I left the Pacific Stock Exchange, that practice was completely gone. No more local listings anywhere in the United States. You had to take your chance, and you still do, on the over-the-counter markets and roll the dice and hope and pray that those companies there's not something funny or shady happening there. So, what did we do? I grew the law firm as best I can. I finally found a wonderful partner, Jenny Casson. Together we began to disrupt the practice of law, but that wasn't enough. We knew that we needed to also start to develop more tools and expertise in the goal of bringing allowing for any investor to invest in a company. Most people will, if you go on the street and ask how many people think anyone can invest in a company, not just a wealthy accredited investor. Does anyone know what an accredited investor is in the United States? An accredited wealthy investor means you are earning $200,000 or your net worth, excluding your personal residence, is $1 million. In the United States, accredited investors are typically the only ones that can invest in a private deal. So if you're out raising your money and you go to a venture fund or you go to AngelList or you go to any number of these platforms, you can only invest if you are an accredited investor. So what does that mean? If you're not an accredited investor, you make up about 98% of the United States if you're not an accredited investor. But the only place you can invest is on a national stock exchange. You cannot invest in any of those private companies, except for one great exception, which is called the direct public offering. So, my goal in life is, and for many years now, has been to re-engineer markets, to make them fair and democratic, and to allow for anyone to be able to invest in these smaller companies if it's done correctly. And that's what we are doing. We're building new markets to make that happen through the use of direct public offerings. Now fast forward to the SVX folks. We all realized that we wanted to do the same thing. They were coming at it from one perspective, we're coming at it from another, and we realized that we can have a much greater impact if we combine forces and do this together.
Cool. Thank you. We'll be able to dive, I think, into more details about it, but as once Mike starts the Q&A and stuff. I wanted to introduce Adam.
Please.
So Adam Spence is the CEO of the Social Venture Exchange in Toronto.